Ladies and gentlemen, very good. Focused already. That's very good in a sports psychology setting. Welcome here. My name is Michelle Sawatsky-Koop, and my connection to this lecture series is one that I've had the honor of, I think, emceeing every one since it started. And my connection before that was, of course, with Cal Botterill, who this lecture series is named after. He was a sports psychologist for our volleyball team when we went to the Olympics in 1996. So that was a thrill. That is a connection I'll always remember. We shared some great times, some trying times, but that's what made it great, because we made it through it. And I think we more than survived. I think we thrived through that thanks to what we learned together. And thanks to Cal for all his help with that. So that's my connection, and that's why I absolutely say yes every year, because I love coming back sort of to see Cal again. That's not the only reason, because every year we've had amazing guests, and this year, one of the best. We heard him this afternoon, those of us who were lucky enough to be over at the Health Science Center, and I know some spent time with him this morning as well. So we are in for a wonderful evening, and I'm excited about it. So we are going to get started right away. The first thing we're going to do is present the Dedicated Service Provider Award. So I would like to call on Aman Hussain, co-chair of Sports Psych Manitoba, to come forward to do the presentation. Yes, let's welcome Aman.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to present this Dedicated Service Award tonight. This year's recipient has been our main contact for Sports Psych Manitoba over the last 2 years. She's represented us with the Sport Medicine Council of Manitoba and has been our liaison with the Canadian Sports Psychology Association. She has been integral to helping with requests for services from Sports Psych Manitoba to the membership and improvements in the submission and review process. She has been instrumental with Sports Psych Manitoba and the Sport Medicine Council of Manitoba in the creation and production of 3 educational modules for athletes and coaches. These 3 modules are entitled Major Games Preparation, Psychology of Quality Training, and the Coaching module. Her energy, enthusiasm, and dedication has benefited all Manitoba sports science professionals as well as countless athletes and coaches. She is an alumni of the University of Winnipeg, where she completed a 4-year undergraduate degree in the in majoring in both kinesiology and applied health and psychology. She accomplished high grades while completing fieldwork and research. She participates in virtually all professional development opportunities available to her, specifically those ones at Carlos and Murphy's. Mostly. Like many of us here in this room, this year's candidate has benefited from one-on-one supervision and interaction with Dr. Cal Botterill. She completed a directed study under his supervision and completed a project in her final undergraduate year. She has been an active participant in our emergency medicine high-performance physician program, and she assisted in the planning and delivery of this program, and it's been fairly well received by the participants in that study. This project is being presented at a national medical conference in Ottawa this September, and an open grand rounds format in Winnipeg in December. Furthermore, over the last 2 years, she's been a research coordinator for 2 major research projects in the field of medicine. Her first project is entitled Effects of 24-Hour Physician Staffing on Patient Care Intensive Care Units, and a palliative care project entitled the National Patient Dignity Inventory Knowledge Translation Study. For her future aspirations, well, the sky's the limit. Though she is still young, she has already demonstrated competency and professionalism beyond her years. She is a tireless worker, a great team person, a compassionate counselor, and a great organizer. Many performers have benefited from her efforts, either directly or indirectly, through her dedicated efforts on behalf of our professional organization. After considerable research on graduate programs, She's been accepted and started her studies at the University of Memphis in clinical psychology. On a personal note, the first time I met her, she was at Carlton Murphy's, and she was really quiet and sitting in the corner, very quiet and wide-eyed. Little did I know that her true personality is as loud and wonderful as she is. It is my pleasure to introduce you the 2010 Jim Henderson Dedicated Service Award in Health and Performance Psychology to Miss Amanda Rock. To present the award, I'd like to introduce Mr. Jim Henderson. He continues to press us all in the field with his determined recovery, and accompanying him is his wife, Carol, his athletic therapist, Paul, and his support staff, John and Ryan.
Before I start, it's probably really important to acknowledge how far Jim has come in the short 4 years that this award's been given out. Every year, the progress amazes all of us that's been there from the beginning, from the first little step to clearly the longest journey thus far, and I'm sure next year it'll only get longer. So, thank you, Amon, for your kind words. It's really nice to know that there are people back here that really know me that well. When I found out that I was going to be this year's Jim Henderson Dedicated Service Provider winner, the first thing I thought of was, you probably should get a speech prepared. And there I was all alone in Memphis, Tennessee, and I couldn't do it because it was like nothing I could come up with could describe how thankful and grateful I was for what happened while I was still here. So there I was at 5 o'clock tonight after I'd spent the whole day back in my surroundings, back getting in touch with my roots, that I remembered how instrumental so many people in this room have been to getting me to where I am now. When the words thank you are just not enough. But yeah, that's all you have to say. I do definitely want to thank Sports Like Manitoba and Coronary and Botterill, because without them, I would not be standing here where I am. On a graduate student stipend, you don't get very far. And plane tickets aren't exactly in your monthly budget. From my parents and my grandparents and my aunt and uncle that are way up there, way more support than I thought I was going to see tonight, as well as those people involved in Sports Like Manitoba that have done so much, and I can say honestly that I would not be where I am as quickly without their help and support. Some people know that my transition into my new department in Memphis hasn't been the smoothest. However, I've been able to weather the storm simply knowing that I have the love and support of those people back at home behind me. So I would like to thank you all. You know who you are. And for all of you else in this room, I hope you enjoyed tonight's lecture. Curt is an amazing speaker, and he has a very important message. Whether you come from medicine, business, sport, or any sort of performance in your life, this all applies. And hopefully we can all become high achievers one day. Thank you.
Congratulations, Amanda. I'm so excited for the evening session. As many know, the Cal Botterill Legacy Lecture is an annual event where we celebrate Dr. Botterill's contributions to our community. This year, for the first time, we have invited someone outside of sport to our home. It is with incredible pride that I invite you to learn from Dr. Curt Tribble, a professor of cardiothoracic surgery and medical director of transplantation at the University of Mississippi. Dr. Tribble is an incredibly accomplished professional, but by the end of our session, I'm confident that you'll also agree that he's an even better person. In order to sustainably accomplish great things, it's important to live an authentic life, and Dr. Tribble is a well-developed and grounded person, which allows him to make an ongoing difference in our world. The format for tonight will be a little different than in past years. In order to make it more intimate, we are going to begin with an interview with Dr. Tribble, where we will have the opportunity to get to know him as a person. We will then open it up to you, the audience, and encourage you to interact with him directly, to learn more about the implications of his experience and his words for your own life. Now, to facilitate the interview with Dr. Tribble, I invite Mr. Jason Brooks, mental trainer with the Canadian Sports Centre, and co-facilitator of the High Performing Physician Curriculum, to the stage along with Dr. Curt Tribble.
We're just going to make an executive decision about these chairs. Please bear with us for 1 sec.
I thought the wood looked good with the background, but clearly comfort has taken a priority here. Okay, I'll let that go. For the audiovisual people, in terms of microphones, would it be all right for them to grab the mics that are up there so they can sit down comfortably and interact? Okay.
First thing I'd like to say is just this. Anytime you see the names anytime you see an event where you have the names Cal Botterill, Jim Henderson on the marquee, it is an absolute honor for me to be a part of in any way, shape, or form. So I want to thank both those guys for this opportunity. I'm excited about this. The format will be pretty informal. Curt and I are going to have a little bit of discussion here, a little chat. And then we'll open it up to you guys at the end for whatever questions you may have. So by all means, come forward with those. I've been fielding this one question a lot in the last couple of weeks that I wanted to touch on first. While we've been sort of promoting this event, mostly to people in sport, I keep getting asked, so it's a sport lecture and you're bringing a surgeon. I don't quite get it. And I think that's part of the reason why we want to have this discussion tonight, because we want to challenge people to start developing a bigger and more broader view on performance. There is something we can learn from this guy. I challenge anybody to leave here tonight that won't be able to take something away they can use in their personal and or professional lives. And that's why I'm excited to have this moment here with Curt tonight. And the other thing I would say is this. The reason that he is here, this man is the embodiment of what it means to be a high-performance person and professional. And we are very lucky to have, who many of us view, one of the most impressive performers in any walk of life or field of endeavor, up here on stage to have a conversation with tonight. So thank you, Curt. And for those of you who don't know, Curt is a cardiothoracic surgeon. And as one can imagine, that is a world where the performance pressures and the expectations are enormous. And it goes without saying that the price of failure could not be higher. Curt would be the first one to tell you, in certain situations, if he's not fully focused and present and feeling the right way, the wrong stitch could certainly mean death for someone. And in spite of those realities, what impresses me and impresses people that have met Curt, he has found a way or ways to accept and to manage those realities, and not only that, to consistently perform at a high level. Oh, emergency. And also to not lose sight of and to stay connected to those things in life that really matter. Family, friends, health, etc. The people I admire most in life, my heroes, I guess you could say, they're not the kind of people that you'd see on the cover of Rolling Stone. They don't show up in the pages of Sports Illustrated. And they sure as heck don't show up on TMZ. The people that I admire most are just regular folks who inspire or impress me with the way that they live their lives. The spirit and the passion they bring to the things that they do and to the people around them. And I could say the humility and the perspective with which they exude at all times. It's their character, not their accomplishments, that matters most to me. And in Dr. Curt Tribble, we have someone who's both of those things. A tremendous character person and one of the most accomplished and well-respected professionals in his field, a very tough and demanding field at that. And it's an honor for me to introduce one of my heroes, Dr. Curt Tribble.
Recognize any of that, and maybe you could have a word with my mom about, she still thinks of me as being her little kid, right? And I also, another sort of disclaimer is that the definition of an expert, right? Someone with some slides, or these days has a flash drive, is more than 100 miles from home, right? So, you don't even know if what he said is true or not, but. I do have a few thoughts about some things that might be fun to talk about, and you all may have some questions and things that you'd like to ask me about, and I'm happy to try to field those once we work our way through the beginning of this.
Did you want to stand, Curt, or did you want to sit?
Sit.
Yeah. Well, he's being very gracious. He's actually got a bit of a sports injury right now, so I think sitting would be his preference. So I guess first question I would have for Curt is this, and now I can say with experience, and having been around you this last couple of days, it impresses me with the level of enthusiasm you have for what you do, for learning, for life, and your extremely positive perspective and outlook on life. And I would just like to know where you're concerned, where exactly does that come from?
Having a positive view? Well, I guess one thing I could say about that is that it's very easy, it would be very easy to not have a positive view about a lot of things. There's all sorts of reasons in everybody's career, life, work, schoolwork, etc., to be unhappy or to have take a dim view of what you're doing or what you think is happening to you, what other people are doing to you, or what's happening in your life or career. And the thing that I've learned is basically you may not get to choose those circumstances, and most often you don't really get to choose those circumstances. What you do get to choose is your reaction to those circumstances. That's a choice you get to make. And whatever it is that you have happening at any given time, your choice of your reaction is yours. And I promise you that you will be happier if you choose to have a positive outlook, a if you see the bright side of things. And nothing is universally right. Nothing is universally good. Everything has some potential downside. But if you make that choice as a performer or as a patient or as a person, I guarantee will be happier in your life. And I think I was impressed just getting started with I was hearing about Jim, you know, an example of that as a patient, as a performer. And I like to talk to my patients about being performers. As a matter of fact, you can imagine a lot of them are in dire straits, in bad shape, a lot of issues that they face, not only the risk of what's going on, but also the setbacks that they may incur during an operation, and the reality that they may never be teenagers again. They may never be the picture of health, but if we together as our team, our medical team, and the patients as part of that team can face those challenges and with a positive outlook, I think they are virtually always going to be better off physically, but they'll also be better off emotionally and from a personal peace of mind standpoint.
Is someone who's highly self-aware and highly self-reflective. Have you always been this way?
I don't know about that. I do think that it occurred to me as a fairly young person that where I could understand what I was trying to do and what I wasn't doing well, and think about how to get better at things, seek out people who could help me from all sorts of different vantage points that I would be better off. When you ask that question, I'm reminded of the fact that I think I told you that I didn't see myself going into medicine. It wasn't mentioned today, but some of y'all might have heard a little bit earlier, if you were at the midday conference, that my dad is a physician, a surgeon actually, and I was born when he was very young, still in school. And he was very busy. He used to take me occasionally when I was a little guy to the hospital, do some things, and people would think, I was thinking all the time I would want to do what he did. And to answer your question about being reflective, I mostly would go there and help him do things and see, as best I could tell, things had gone nearly perfectly, flawlessly. I mean, I was very impressed, people that were injured or shot or doing cancer operations on them or whatever else. And I'd come home, think, that was pretty neat. And then I'd go to school the next day, and I'd take my math class, and inevitably, I'd take a test or a quiz or whatever, and inevitably I'd make a careless error. And what was I to think? I'm an idiot, right? And I thought all of what was going on at the hospital was nearly perfect, and it was very obvious to me on a daily basis that what I was doing was not nearly perfect, and that I certainly had no, even at an ethical level, no business being a doctor. And I went off to college thinking I was going to be a high school basketball coach and teach English maybe. I was an English major in college, and that's what I thought. I won't kill anybody doing that, probably. And so it took me a while to come to grips with the idea that maybe, just maybe, an awful lot of these folks in medicine weren't perfect either. And maybe there was a possibility that maybe I could do that kind of work. And gradually, as I moved on through college, I decided I would do that. And so I think that's sort of a way of answering your question of an evolution of being reflective, that I thought it not just something I should do to get better, but also something I needed to do even at a very fundamental and ethical level, to think about, what I was doing and whether it was right for me to do it, and whether it would be ethical for me to even take on the challenge of a career in medicine.
I want to talk a bit about belief and trust in self. It's a big theme in in any high performance thing, obviously. It's a central trait or characteristic of high performers. The establishment of that in yourself, belief and trust. How did that transpire in you?
Well, I think that I have, and maybe this is really an extrapolation of the answer I just have given you, is that recognized very much my own potential for frailty and a lack of perfection. And in fact, it has never seemed right to me to say that I would envision success or that I would imagine that I'd always do everything just right. In fact, I think for me, even from the time I just described as a young person, especially as I got into surgery, I always felt that the way I could justify being in that role was to have a framework that was, on the one end of the spectrum, an ethical framework, and on the other end of the spectrum, a practical framework for the reality that at least some of the time, maybe even a lot of the time, that things would not go perfectly. And I knew that I needed to develop a practical approach to that. We talked in the conference earlier today about the fact that there's a great article that a lot of y'all, if you haven't seen it, would I think very much enjoy reading, by Malcolm Gladwell. A lot of y'all know now as an author of a number of books have been very popular, like The Tipping Point and Blink. But before he started writing those books, he was just more of a regular writer for the New Yorker. And one of his great articles was called The Physical Genius. And he studied the elite performers like Yo-Yo Ma, the famous cellist, and a famous neurosurgeon named Charlie Wilson. And I know he's not from Winnipeg or from Manitoba, but Wayne Gretzky. I know he's a couple provinces over. And he studied Wayne Gretzky, or wrote about, thought about those people that were obviously elite performers, that were great in their fields. And he wrote about what he thought they had in common. And believe it or not, what he said, the essence of the article was that he learned that what all these people had in common was they had a practical-minded obsession with the possibility and consequence of failure. And it surprised him because he'd heard so often people would envision success. You know, imagine everything going perfectly, and that'll be how you actually will be the best performer. What he said he learned from those folks is that was not true. Arguably, these people were the best in the world at the time in their field, and the thing that tied them together was actually a practical-minded obsession with the possibility and consequence of failure. When I read that, I thought, you know, I think that's part of what has gotten me through my career, learning initially, then later performing, and also teaching other people to perform. You know, we didn't mention much about this in my introduction, but you know, I've been a teacher all my life, and it's been a huge part of my life. And in teaching in medicine, especially in surgery, is very similar, in my opinion, to coaching and coaching performers, coaching athletes. In fact, you could say surgery is the most full contact sport that there is, right? And in fact, one of the reasons I'm here and how I got to know Cal was very early in my career. I sought out the sports psychology folks at my institution at the University of Virginia. Were very thoughtful people, and we quickly agreed we had an awful lot in common about how we viewed performance and teaching and coaching and all sorts of other things, leadership, teamwork, et cetera, et cetera. And I started at that time finding a lot of inspiration from all of that, but also a language that I could use to help people understand what they were doing in the realm of surgery and learning surgery, not only just performing surgery, but also learning surgery and getting better at surgery and dealing with the stresses and the challenges, the burdens, the things that, the setbacks really that were inevitable and having this, not just the obsession, you know, you could focus on that word, the obsession, and say, that might not be that good, but what I really liked in that phrase was the practical-minded obsession. That is, they have a practical way of dealing with things that don't go well, a way that works, a way that's part of their lives. And I think that that's something that we need to teach. And, you know, there are a lot of people that are devastated by something. They're taught everything's going to go well. You envision success. If it doesn't happen, they fall off the planet. And it happens in medicine, it happens in sport, it happens in coaching. And I think that in order to become a resilient, hardy person in whatever field you choose to perform in, music, teaching, athletics, surgery, you have to have that ability to rebound, get better constantly. As I mentioned earlier, one of the phrases I like that describes that, you have to just start with the reality of human beings and work backwards from there. We're fallible, never perfect, have to have a method for dealing with that.
I'd like to build a little bit on that too, Curt, this idea of, you know, the obsession with the possibility of failure. I want to read you a snippet, interview that you did several years ago, and it's interesting because it's a question or series of questions that he asks potential resident applicants in his department, and I think it's such a poignant thing to do because it's really setting people up to not only to understand the full reality of what they are stepping into, but to help prepare them in advance. This is what you said. Sorry, this is what you asked those residents. How are you going to deal with failure in its ultimate, bitter, full, boring way? Because it's going to be a reality of your life. You're going to have things that are not going to work well. You're going to have things that you can't change and things that are not going to turn out the way that you wanted. How are you going to deal with that reality? My question to you is, how have you learned?
I asked those questions of interviewees, by the way, knowing that many of them would show up not having failed miserably up to that point in their lives. Almost by definition, they're probably amongst the best students around, and they've been great at a lot of things. And it's certainly the things they wrote down on their applications sounded like they were people that were almost superhuman or inhuman. I'd look at those things and I'd say, I know this can't be the whole story. It's sort of like, it's like the radio guy, Paul Harvey. He said, now I want to hear the rest of the story. And one of the things I could ask in that realm to people would be, you know, tell me about a failure. And, you know, some of the folks would think erroneously that the proper answer to that is, I've never really failed. And so then I would just put a big red X on their application, say they're lying, right? I don't want liars. And because everybody's failed at things, and, you know, sometimes they might seem like small change, but they may have affected them in a way that they might not want it to remember, but at least I wanted them to think about and talk about. But to answer your specific question of how I thought through that and had tried to help others, is extrapolating from my theme, constant theme of we'll start with imperfect human beings and work backwards. The first thing that has to do is recognize that when something happens that's not what you want, or if you hear something from someone else that's not what you want to hear, somebody's critical of you, somebody's judging you, or something, you do something and they say that's not good, you have to have a strategy for dealing with that. And what I learned at Virginia, another person that was there besides the sports psych crowd that I got to know was Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And do y'all know who that is? The woman who wrote Death and Dying, and she talks about the stages of grief. I see some people nodding. You've heard of this? It occurred to me. I knew her, and I heard her speak, and I talked to her some, and it struck me one day what she was talking about and what we were supposedly learning about when we were students was how to talk to a patient about getting a fatal diagnosis. You are going to die of this disease, and I'm going to help you with that. I'm going to help you die. Well, I understood what she had discovered, what she had observed. She made observations about human beings, and I always like that, making observations rather than making statements. She made observations, and she said, what do people do first? They're angry, right? And they deny. They say, that's not me. That didn't happen. Somebody else is to blame. So there's this mixture of anger and denial. And then they work through the stages. And the second sort of category are depression and bargaining. They're sad. They try to, get out of it a little bit, like maybe it wasn't so bad, or maybe I didn't really do it, or maybe somebody else had part of the blame. They come to the final stages of, she described them, acceptance and hope. To me, the acceptance and hope category was the category of looking forward. Hope implies you're looking forward instead of back, right? You've dealt with what you're looking at, and now you're going to look forward to what you're going to do next. And the acceptance part implies, to some degree at least, that you've learned something. You've actually gotten through the emotional parts that are inevitable. An inevitable part of being a human being that hears something or sees something or experiences something or does something they want to have done or don't like. Then they learn from it. They let the emotion go. There's a cathartic part of it, catharsis, letting go of emotion. Then they come to a point where they can actually learn and get better and apply whatever it is that they've learned to whoever comes next or whatever comes next. And to me, learning that was a very powerful thing. And I'll tell you a little story about how I actually learned to encapsulate that. When I had finished the beginning of my training, which is called general surgical training, in the U.S., they're changing the paradigm now, but in the U.S. until recently, we trained completely in general surgery. So when we were done with that, we would be ready to go out and do general surgery, trauma, burns, hernias, gallbladders, cancer surgery, colon surgery, breast surgery, things like that. And then we would choose, if we wanted, to take additional training in cardiothoracic surgery. That's lungs, esophagus, heart, aorta, things like that. So the most common operation in America, in Canada too, I'm sure for the past 30 years, has been coronary bypass surgery. That is, you're doing bypasses for blocked arteries in the heart. And lots of people here would have people in their family that have had that done and would know people that had that done or might have even had that done themselves. It's a life-saving operation to have blood flow to your heart. Well, you're operating on these little tiny vessels, and they're as small as the inside of a pin, a ballpoint pen. They're 1 to 2 millimeters. It's pretty small. You have to wear magnifying glasses to see, and et cetera. So we're so into those little vessels. And when you first start off in the anastomosis, you actually sew the easy part. That is the back of it, which is the part where blood doesn't really need to go. Doesn't need to go backwards in the artery towards the blockage. But it certainly needs to go forward through the still open artery. So as you're sewing along, usually my attendings, my teachers, my faculty members wouldn't fuss at me too much, whatever I did. I'd be sewing along, I'm feeling okay, I'm feeling good, I'm getting warmed up. This is really going well. And it seemed like inevitably I'd get halfway through the first side, getting closer to that toe. Now, I didn't really understand how they felt until I became a faculty member. They began to get more and more worried, more apprehensive about what you were going to do, knowing that you might sew the vessel shut. And pretty close to the end, and it seemed like, it wasn't really every time, but it seemed like almost every time, at least when I was first starting, they'd say, "That's a terrible stitch. You could kill the guy with that," And they were more colorful than that. Sometimes they used some words I can't repeat in this audience, or they'd say, things like, "You might as well have taken a gun out and shot him," or another favorite term was, "That stitch was a widowmaker." Most of our patients were men, Like, "You just made a widow out of this guy's wife," or "If I haven't stopped you, you would have." Well, what do you think? The first thing I thought was, I should just turn around and cold cock this guy right here in the OR. So I'd have to fight back that impulse. And it was harder at times than others, and I never hit one of my attendings. I probably would. I assure you I would not be here today if I had. But it crossed my mind. So what do? You take the stitch out, you put it back in, and by the way, say that God's honest truth, frequently I put it back in almost exactly the same, and they'd say, "Oh, that's okay." I'm thinking, why do we just have this little interlude while the heart's dying? We got the clamp on, the heart's ischemic, the longer we're there, the more injury there are to the heart. But guess what? The stitch after that, A, I had to put it in within seconds, right? B, it was going to be harder. And the stakes were higher. So first, I was still living with the last stitch. And I was trying to put the next one in, and it got worse. And I wasn't even paying attention hardly. And one of my friends, who's a sports psychologist that Cal knows, and maybe some of the others of you do too, a guy named Tom Hansen is a baseball coach in a small college in New York. And Tom wrote a neat book called Heads Up Baseball. And Tom taught me something later. This is not at that time, but I learned this later. He said, when a kid makes an error or strikes out, he's getting ready to go back out on the field, he would make him carry the bat with him. And his player would say, why are you making me carry the bat back out on the field? I got it by glove. He said, because you're still at bat. I don't want you on the field with the need to field and play defense when you're still thinking about the last strike, whether you're mad at the umpire, you mad at yourself, whatever else. Well, I was literally carrying the bat to the next stitch, and that is, I wasn't ready to put the next stitch in. But guess what else? I had to learn, right? I had to actually, the only reason I was there under those conditions was to get better. It wasn't just that we're doing the operation. I had to learn something from that. So it finally occurred to me that I had to encapsulate Dr. Kubler-Ross's strategy. That I had to say, my initial reaction is going to be angry, then I'm going to be depressed, and then I have to learn something. And I have to do that in about 2 seconds. And then I have to blank it completely out of my mind, be completely focused on the next stitch. So I learned how to do that. And I forced myself to get to that point that I could actually perform, reflect, learn, have the emotional experience that I needed to have, and let it wash out, go on to the next thing. So that's something I couldn't do in a day's time or an hour's time. I had to do it in seconds. Anyway, I learned that number one, that process is valid and useful and doable. 2, you can work it so that it becomes efficient and encapsulated in a short period of time. And I also learned that you could actually take some of those things. This was that era for me was the very beginning of the time people were using computers. I learned it was almost like minimizing a screen. You could put it down at the bottom of your computer screen and come back to it later if you needed to think more about it. But at least you had to stop thinking about it and get ready to do the next thing. So I think that is a way that I took the more general concept of reflection and analysis to a microcosm and to a very efficient means of thinking about what I was doing and being able to clear my mind and clear my emotions, be ready to do whatever it was that was next. And, y'all teach this in sports sometime. I mean, I remember there was where I grew up in South Carolina, there was a great basketball team there. They were very good, ranked #1 in the nation a good bit of the time. There was a local high school star that had gone to play there. The kid is named Nate Davis, and they were playing some evil competitor like Marquette or something. And the game was on the line. The team was down by 1, and Coach Frank McGuire gives the ball to this guy, Nate Davis, and he shoots the ball to win the game. And the reporter runs up to him after the game and says, Nate, I can't believe this. Said, you missed 17 straight shots, and you hit the game winner. What were you thinking about when you shot the game winner? And he said, I missed 17 shots. And you could bet, I don't know for sure what the coach had said to him, but you know good and well, the coach didn't say, Nate, don't worry about the fact you missed 17 shots. You can take the game winner. The coach said, when they asked him, he said, he's the captain of the team. He's the man. And we weren't going to talk to him about that. We didn't want him to think about that at all. The difference between Nate missing 17 straight shots, if I miss 17 straight stitches, I kill people. If he misses 17 straight shots, he has a colorful interview. But still, but still, the idea is, either way, to be able to perform at that moment, to put in that either widowmaker or widowmaker, or to shoot the game-winning shot, you have to have a clear mind at that particular time. You're going to focus on what you have to do and not be burdened with what has already gone on, even if it was just right before that.
In terms of that process, Curt, because I mean, there's so much application, not only in medicine, but obviously in sport. You know, some of the sports that I work in where you experience some disappointment, and much like you've described, you don't have a lot of time before you got to gear up and go at it again. So I would just be curious to know whether it's a matter of practice, repetition, reflection, etc., maybe all of the above. How did you take that process and turn it into something that went from here to here? That is to say, how did it become efficient, where it worked for you in the moment in 2 seconds flat when you were feeling some strong feelings?
A short answer to that is necessity is the mother of invention, right? I mean, you have no choice. I mean, you either learn to live in that moment and keep performing, or you don't. But for me, part of it was that it wasn't just that I needed to be able to perform on the next stitch. I also absolutely needed to learn. I had to have a mechanism for learning and getting better moment by moment. And in a setting in which a heart is literally dying while you work on it, you don't have time to do any, you either do that, either you develop a mechanism for that, or you get out of the business. One of the two. I mean, you can't really perform. You can't learn to perform at a higher level unless you're able to do both, learn and focus.
I would assume, you know, in your line of work in particular, if we could visit the widow's stitch for a second, and I guess we're talking about, you know, extreme failure, the worst kind in your line of work. You know, we had the unique privilege this past year of learning about high performance from a group of emergency medicine residents here. And one of the concepts of yours that really resonated deeply with them was the idea of remember and forgive. I'm just wondering if you could explain to folks here what that means and how it sort of serves as a compass in your professional world.
That phrase is actually in the title of the book, a book that y'all might be interested in reading, is Forgive and Remember. And if you think about it, it's an extrapolation of the old adage, forgive and forget, right? Surely most people have heard that term. You know, your mom told you that if somebody was mean to you or insulted you or, you know, whatever, you say, forgive and forget. Well, if you say that something that's gone wrong in medicine, you forgive and forget, you're an unethical person. You're an unethical physician. You have not fulfilled your ethical obligation to the person who experienced that harm or that bad outcome. And sometimes it's not really something you could have done different or anybody could have done different. But still, if somebody hasn't done well, you have an ethical obligation to learn from that situation. So the guy who wrote that book was a sociologist, actually, from the University of Pennsylvania, Charles Bosk. And somebody gave me a chapter out of that book when I was actually fresh out of med school. And I read it and I thought, oh my God, this is really amazing. Because nobody had ever talked to me about any of this when I was a medical student. And I was still sort of thinking back to my, in retrospect, not that much younger days when I thought it wasn't even ethical for me to go there at all. And now I'm choosing to do this high-risk part of the profession. And when I read that, I thought, all right, there's some really good lessons in this book. The book is about actually a residency out on the West Coast. The sociologist, Charlie Bosk, had gone there to study hierarchies. As a sociologist, he just wanted to learn. He said, what should I do? That's what I want to learn about, hierarchies in human endeavor. He got back and immersing himself in an Indian tribe or the military or other sort of formal hierarchies that he thought he might find to study. Somehow he got off on the idea that maybe a surgical residency would be one that would be good to immerse himself in. And his plan, his PhD work, was he was going to live there for a year. What he came away with was he wasn't very impressed with the hierarchy at all. To the outside eye, it was staunch and hardened, but to the insider, it was not. But what really amazed him was how they dealt with medical failure. And that's the subtitle of the book, is Managing Medical Failure. So anyway, what I initially took away from that was that remember and forgive part of this, first of all, it was probably backwards. He used the title Forgive and Remember because it was a takeoff on forgive and forget. And I thought the actual ethical approach to this was what you actually said, which was remember and forgive. And that is, you must do the intellectual work before you can have the forgiveness of yourself and others. And then gradually the framework sort of became you had to do emotional work first in order to be capable of doing the intellectual work. And once you'd done all of that work, then you had an ethical foundation to forgive yourself and others. I mean, some people are good at forgiving themselves. Some people are really good at that. Some people are really good at forgiving other people and not themselves, and they beat themselves up incessantly. They can't even bear it. And you have to do both. And so I like the book. I like the concept. I like the words. And but I ended up thinking, and when I talked about it to our residents and students and others who ask about it, I like the idea that you can only forgive yourself and others once you've done this work. And some of it's in the short run, as I just described a minute ago. Some of it is much more laborious and longer term. But once you've done that work, you do have an ethical framework for moving forward, for forgiving yourself and others for things that didn't go well.
Another necessity in your line of work?
Is it, you say? Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can't keep functioning. Well, I guess some people don't think very deeply about some of these things, but mostly they do. And even if they pretend they don't, or to an untrained eye, it seems they might not. Most people, in one way or another, are struggling with these things, especially the people that are taking actions, procedurally based medical people. There's people who are not proceduralists, who don't make decisions, who aren't taking action, or aren't doing things. And the ultimate of those people would be a palliative care person. Very important. We mentioned, I think, you work with some of the palliative care people, and those folks don't struggle with this sort of thing quite so much because they're helping, so they're caring for somebody, and they're focused primarily on the care, not on taking action or things like that. But even they may have some things that they did not well. Maybe they didn't care for the patient's pain on the patient's emotional state recovery. So I guess everybody has some of this, but certainly more focused in the normal. So it's to answer your question, is it a necessity to be able to deal with this? Absolutely. It's not just an ethical imperative. It's a personal imperative. And you can't really go on with your work and maintaining your energy, and maintaining your ability to be ready to take on the next patient, the next challenge, the next operation, the next diagnosis, the next procedure, unless you have a mechanism for dealing with this.
You mentioned earlier today, Curt, at the presentation at HSC, the importance of being ready for uncertainty. And I would just like to know, in terms of preparing yourself emotionally for tough cases or things that might spring up that have the potential to distract you, cause you to lose focus, that sort of thing, how do you prepare ahead of time from an emotional standpoint for situations like that?
Well, I think part of it is that you do have to put the hay in the barn. You do have to prepare in every way that you can, technically, educationally, from a factual standpoint. I think we were mentioning last night this relatively young otolaryngologist who had come to me who had some tumors that she wanted me to take out. They were implanted on her heart. And I was telling Jason and Cal and Doreen last night about this gal. Amazingly enough, the woman emailed me during dinner. this lady, this is an operation I did 20 years ago or so, and it was a very high-risk situation. She was a physician herself, She knew how high risk the operation was. It was one that not only had I not done before, but almost nobody had around the world. And ironically, as an otolaryngologist, that's a head and neck surgeon, ear, nose, and throat surgeon, the operation involved a nerve that's down in the left side of your chest, which might have left her with a permanent tracheostomy. I bet y'all have seen some people like that. They can't speak, have to breathe out of a hole in their neck. And she came to I'll tell you just briefly, when I first met her, she was coming to my clinic the next day, and I had huge clinics in those days, 20, 30 people, and I didn't really perceive, looking over the list, that this was going to be such a challenging situation. And I was sitting in my office at 8 o'clock at night, getting paperwork, had my feet up on the desk, shoes off, listening to some really loud music. Everybody had gone out of the office, and I had the music turned up really loud. And somebody comes walking in the front door, and it's this woman, this tall, thin woman with blue jeans and cowboy boots and a vest and a cowboy hat on. I thought, who is this? And in our office at this time of night, I thought, oh, it's probably an artist. You know, we had a lot of people around that town that did artwork for us, for talks and things like that. And I figured she's just dropping off some things. I said, oh, you know, what are you doing here? And she said, oh, I was leaving a note for one of the doctors or something. I'm sure she didn't think it was me. And I said, well, who is that? I'll get it to them. I'll make sure they get it. I'll put it on their desk. She said, oh, it's Dr. Tribble. I said, oh, well, that's me. She said, I have an appointment with you tomorrow. I could already tell she's kind of disappointed. She's probably expecting someone who's like had a lot of gray hair and stuff, you know. And I said, well, come on in. And I said, where are you from? She said, oh, I'm from Montana. I said, oh. I said, well, sit down in my chair. Here, I have this neat chair you can lean. I call it the worry chair, when you can lean almost flat in. I sit in that when I'm worried. I mean, like staying there overnight, you know, and I'm worried about what everybody's up to around the hospital. So I call it my worry chair. So I said, sit down. And she told me very succinctly her story. And as she got to the part about this nerve, I said, Sherry, I think we need to stop right there. I said, it was 8 o'clock, 8:30 by this time maybe. I said, have you had dinner? And she said, no. And I said, what are you planning to do for dinner? She said, I don't know. I have a room across the street at the hotel. And I said, hang on a second. I called my wife. I said, Megan, what do we have to eat at our house? She said, and my usual fare at night is chicken Caesar salad. She said, I'll do a salad for you. I said, do you have enough for 2 people? She said, well, we can make do. I said, I'm bringing a guest home. She said, no problem. I'll split it up. So I took Sherry to my house. We lived out in the mountains. This old house, a 200-year-old house that we gotten in, been fixed up kind of halfway enough for regular modern people to live in. But we actually had indoor plumbing. They didn't have indoor plumbing when the people who had built the house had no indoor plumbing. So we had dinner. We didn't talk at all anymore that night. And she came more officially to my clinic the next day. And I said, listen, you know, I don't even know if we can do this operation for you, but it'll take me some time to prepare for it properly. And she said, okay. And I said, I know you've gone around to the Mayo Clinic and Johns Hopkins and Vanderbilt and some of the other West Coast programs to talk to people about doing this operation. I said, I know, you know, you might not even want us to do it here. I said, but I'll give it some thought, and I'll let you know if I think I can do it. And she said, that's fine. It's a very elective thing. Relatively elective thing. And so I went to work and thought about there were 2 tumors actually. One was on the right side of the heart that would involve the conduction system. She might need a pacemaker, might need a valve, might need a coronary bypass. Or on the left side, which would involve this nerve, and might need to have to resect the nerve or to do a nerve graft, which I didn't really know how to do. And not really my valley. We don't usually do nerve surgery. So I consulted with my friends who did. What all would we do? Where would we take nerve graft from? How would we go about it? I searched out people. Interestingly enough, I didn't know about this, but one of the experts on this particular type of tumor lives over in British Columbia. His name is Guy Friday, and I somehow found out about him, and I contacted him. And he'd done a couple of operations. I asked the guy, "Let me pick your brain." I did. I wrote it all down. He wrote me a letter about some thoughts he had, and I gradually collected everything I could find about this operation. And interestingly enough, it encompassed a 3-ring notebook, a black 3-ring notebook. It was that thick. It was full from front to back. So I called Sherry. I said, Sherry, I'm ready. I've done my homework. I think I can do this operation for you if you still want, if you're still considering having me do it. And I said, I know you probably found somebody at the Mayo Clinic or somewhere else to do it. You know, they're real smart, a lot smarter than us mountain guys up here in Virginia. She said, no, I want you to do the operation. I said, all right, we're ready. So she came, and we did, and it turned out well. And she's back home 15 years later, still sending me funny emails. Anyway, for me to approach an operation like that was very high stakes, very high risk, very complicated. I couldn't get to any kind of emotional state to be ready to do it until I'd done the intellectual work ahead of time. So that was probably as much preparation as I've ever had to carry out to be prepared for an operation in my life. But I did it, and I didn't actually agree to do it until I had done that work. And I wouldn't have just said, oh, just come, we'll figure it out once you get here. I mean, that would be wrong. I mean, it might have worked out okay, but if it hadn't, what am I to do? I knew it might not work out optimally, and I had to be able to live with myself. So the preparation part of that was exhaustive and extensive, in my opinion, thorough. And once I'd done that thorough preparation, I felt I could actually offer her an operation in good conscience. And we did.
The added bit of pressure in that situation was it turns out her husband's a lawyer.
She didn't tell me that at first. I only learned that after the operation. Yeah, to me, it was just Brad, you know, and he wasn't even there for this initial consultation, so I hadn't even met him until the time of her operation. And they confided several days post-op that he was a lawyer. So we knew we were not going to tell. They said we were not going to tell you that. No need to add that to the equation. Thank you.
So let me ask you this: when when you or the people you work with, the people around you, when you are going through a tough time, whether it be personally or professionally, what kinds of things do you do to kind of get yourself realigned?
Well, that's a great question. For me, I've always felt that that basically what a situation like you're asking about would generate is emotion of some kind. And while I said earlier, one of my goals is to channel some of that emotion into something that's not so negative, try to make choices to make it not negative. Sometimes you have that energy, and it's pent up, that emotional energy that you need to deal with. And for me, the way to let that off, let that steam off, is doing something athletic or exercise related. And I've always had, weights set up in my house. I do yoga. I ride a bike. I play basketball, even though Jason's already accused me of being a gimp. And it is true, I've got my ankle brace on, but I also play with this ankle brace every week still. Sadly, every other person I play with is at least 20 years younger than me. and I'm not very good anymore. I was not that good ever, but I'm not one of these guys who wears the t-shirt around and says the older I get, the better I was. I'm not going to tell you I was really good at one point. I've been around some people really good, including my friend Newberg, who I learned an awful lot from. And in fact, Doug would often be the recipient of a demand to go biking or running or doing some sort of workout. So I found that's a release. I think also talking with friends. Sometimes some of them medical side of things. Some of them, like my sports psych friends, talking about getting grounded. Sometimes with my wife, who I met in the OR. Actually, she's an OR nurse, so she has some sense of what I do. And so I think also talking to people. I think the two principles that are aligned there is to not leave it pent up, if possible. I mean, unfortunately, there are times when you've got to get right back in the game, and that can be a little dicey when you're tired, or tired physically or tired emotionally. But sometimes you have to. You have to do that. To get right back at it. One night I'd been up all night literally, I got home and 36 straight hours of working. I don't think I'd slept during that time. And I've gotten pretty good at that and know how to do it. But one of my principles is if I'm really tired like that, I'm still going to work out. And I got home, and it was a beautiful night. I felt like the weather right now here in Winnipeg. And we often didn't run the AC in our house, and we had the windows open. And I went out to this old shed I had where I had my weights set up and worked out. I was feeling great. And I had this outdoor shower at my house. I love that. I mean, I go out there and cut the shower on, just, great, outdoors. It had a little box in it, by the way. It wasn't too risque. I was taking a great shower. Remember that shower, Will? We had out back. And I come in and I'm feeling so good. And I lie down on my bed, clean sheets, have the window open, Jesus coming in, my wife's asleep. And I look at my clock right by the bed. It says 12 o'clock. And my alarm's already set for the usual time that I get about 5:15. And I said, great, I got 5 straight hours. I'm not on call. This is great. I'm going to be really great tomorrow. I laid down, and the phone rang. It was my favorite all-time resident, best guy I ever trained. He's still in the faculty of Virginia. And his name is John Kern. John said, Curt, I need you here now. Hang up the phone and don't talk to me. And he hung up. I looked at my clock. It's 12:05. I was already in REM sleep. 5 minutes. I woke up. I've never gotten a call like this, especially from a great resident like this. And I jump in the car and I'm calling back. I said, John, what the heck is going on? He said, we're over here. All the other faculty member colleagues were there. And he said, we got this girl. She's dying. When nobody knows what to do. I said, what's she dying of? He said, she's bleeding into her airway. And I think it's from this aneurysm in her chest. I said, John, she's drowning. She's not bleeding to death, she's drowning. I said, take her to the operating room, and we're going to put her on bypass so we can at least oxygenate her. Anyway, we were up all night. But I had, my mind was clear. I had worked out, took my outdoor shower, lay down for 5 minutes, ready to go.
That is efficient.
I will be candid. It was incredible thing. I had to do an operation, in contrast to the other girl's operation, which I did an operation I've never done before. And both of these cases were published. We wrote them up as case reports and were published in our most prominent thoracic surgery journal in the world about what we did in both cases. And we got done, well, we weren't done. We were almost done with this second case I'm describing. And we were on to something that didn't matter very much. And but we weren't done yet. And I was really done. I mean, I was almost 48 hours straight. And I was falling asleep. And I knew my friends who ran the coffee bar showed up at 6 o'clock in the morning downstairs. And I said, John, I can't help you anymore. I just can't operate anymore. I said, we're going to get coffee. And the anesthesiologist says, you can't go get coffee. This is an operation going on. This girl's almost dead. I said, she's not dead now. She's fine now. I said, we're almost done. And we can't quite finish the operation. Our physician assistant to come in. I said, Ken, stay here with her. Oh, this is, there's a problem with our partially this money for us today. We're going to get coffee. I said, you can do that? I said, yeah. So we're doing it. I've never actually done that before since. Went down, got coffee, came back. So it was good too. Not regular, not weak coffee, real coffee. Just a double shot. So we came back up and finished the operation. So anyway, I tell that partly as a sort of footnote to the whole story, just knowing your stuff, knowing when you can do what you have to do, and when you've actually reached the point where you need to do something different, offer help, get a friend, or in that case, take a break.
Like somebody said this afternoon, I could just listen to you talk forever. And we may be feeling that way, but then you'll actually literally be here forever. So we'd like to, I think, open it up to some questions. And I don't think I need to facilitate it. I'm going to let you guys maybe do that and go ahead. So if you do have any questions, I wonder, should I grab that mic and run around to Yeah? That's all right. All right, so if you have any questions, raise your hand and I'll try and get the mic to you. Oh, there we go.
Thank you. Dr. Tribble, I was wondering, when you were making those stitches and your attendings asked you if you were giving them the Widowmaker,
They never asked, ever.
told you.
They told.
They told you. Do you think they were setting you up?
No. I wondered about it at the time, but then once I had their job, I had no idea. I thought I was stressed out by this, but if the patient died, the person who really took the hit was that attending. And I just never realized how stressful that job was until I had it. I always thought, those guys, they know what they're doing, they know everything, they're attending, they're cool, cool as a cucumber, except when they're yelling at me. And I had no idea. I think they probably would rather not have said anything. No one, it couldn't help, actually, the patient or me, for them to be yelling at me. I think they just couldn't help it. I don't think it was planned or contrivance. And if it were, I think they would have done it after we'd gotten past the really tough part and we were on the easier part. I don't think they were setting that up.
So it helped you. Do you? It helped you, and you grew with it. Do you do that to your students?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Because I don't think that helps. I don't think having that kind of approach to teaching ever helps. And I think my students and residents, they know that I care deeply about the patient, and I care equally deeply about them, and they know it, and I make sure they know it. And because I want them to listen to me and not be mad at me. I want to take some of that emotional part out of the equation right off the bat. Frequently, one of the things I would say to them, specifically, to very specifically answer your question, I would say, I'm not going to say a word to you unless I'm certain that the stitch you took would kill the patient. And once you've put it in, if I have a comment about it that I think is valid to make at that time, I will, or I'll remember it and talk to you about it later. And part of what I wanted them to do was get in an even, smooth flow. I said, I don't want there to be a hitch. I would see them come to my room, you'd put the stitch in and stop halfway through, like look up. Asking for approval. I said, I'm not going to say anything. You put it in. If it's really bad, I'll say so. Otherwise, you keep sewing. And they can get fast that way. I bet y'all have seen this in sport where the coaches, the players looking over at the sideline to see what the coach is thinking before or after a move or a shot or whatever it is. Quarterback. And you know good and well, those people are not as good as they can be if they weren't looking over there. They need to know the coach will talk to them constructively afterwards, and that the coach has actually done their homework or the work that needs to be done ahead of time. So I tried my best to not recreate that environment.
Anyone else? I'll go here first.
Thank you. I'm a great believer in first family experiences, and if this question is too personal, then just don't answer it. But I guess it's in two parts. How would you characterize your father's personality, having spent a few years around him? And what kind of an impact did that first family experience of mom and dad have on you when you reflect back on it today?
Well, I really didn't think as I was coming along that my dad had much influence on my decisions about my career. And that kind of went along with the story I was telling about not going into medicine, not deciding to go into medicine, etc. And he never, ever said anything about it to me, ever. Like, you should do it, or you should consider it, or you might like it, or it'd be a good thing, or you might be good at it. Never. Not until I said, I'm thinking about doing it, he said, okay, that's cool. But I one way of answering your question, somebody asked me, I have 5 younger brothers, 6 boys, no girls. No girls allowed in my family. My poor mom. It took her about 20 years to regain her sanity. We only one of the 6 was never in jail, and it was always something happening. Luckily, she didn't know much about all that. I had to bail a lot of them out of jail and stuff. But I was thinking about it one time when somebody asked me about it. I said, I really think that the answer to that question is, I had an epiphany about the answer to that question. I was driving home from Virginia. They live in South Carolina where I had gone to high school. First time I'd gone to any school more than 2 years in a row in my life. And I left and never went back. I mean, other than for Thanksgiving or Christmas or something. I was driving down, and we had the boys in the back of the car, and we got to Charlotte, North Carolina, which we were about an hour and a half from home. And I promised my mom we'd be home for supper. I mean, you know how moms are. I mean, everything revolves around food, right? What we're going to eat, how many people are going to be there, what we're going to have, everything, all that. So I called and said, Mom, we're not going to make it in time for dinner. And she said, I said, we fed the boys at McDonald's, and y'all just go ahead to bed. These went to bed at 9:30, 9:45, about the time we were going to get there. So y'all go to bed, we'll let ourselves in, we'll be quiet, we'll see y'all tomorrow. She said, Curt, in this family, we have never eaten by the clock, and we will eat when you get here. And I said, that's true. That is what's going to happen, isn't it? We got in the car, and everybody, my wife and the boys all fell asleep, and I'm driving through the night, and I said, I realized, and she didn't fuss, she didn't complain, she didn't say anything like, what? You said you'd get here and you didn't get here, none of that. And I realized, as I drove through the night down to that, to eat that meal with them, that I had never in my life heard either of my parents utter a single syllable of complaint about what my father did ever. And that man worked like a dog. He still works. He's 83 years old. He still goes to work every day. He works for one of my brothers, actually. It's kind of a single turnaround there. But, and I think when people ask us, how is it that 3 of you do what your dad did? And then you think, for sure he must have been, grilling us and pushing us and talking to us back. Never. And I think what it was not what he said, but what he did, and what they said about what he did. And I'm very cognizant of that concept of not whining, moaning, and complaining about not getting to this or getting to do that or going there. And I really think that collectively we have to think that you get to choose what your language is going to be. And I choose the language of commitment over the language of complaint. And I think that's the best gift they ever gave any of us is that exact example, that setting that standard, setting that example. So I think I took that more from them than anything. But I was asked to go back to my college. I went to this little school in South Carolina, and they gave me some kind of, some kind of reward or something I had to go there for. I loved my college. I mean, it was so formative for me. And a guy, my organic chemistry professor, had been in graduate school when I was in med school. So they were friends in Nashville, Vanderbilt. And he wrote my dad a note, which he didn't intend for me to see. My dad showed it to me. He says, David, he said, we had Curt up here, and he was telling some interesting things about how he thinks through stuff. He said, I know he didn't think he made that up. I know you taught him every word. He said, I could hear you talking the whole time. My dad showed it to me. He says, I know this is not true. I know you've really thought and learned and studied and contemplated all these things. But maybe my organic chemistry professor actually was right. And maybe I did learn an awful lot more. But the lessons were implicit and not explicit, I think, most often.
We have another question up here.
My father's also a surgeon, and he always describes the work he does as a team collaborative effort with himself, the anesthetist, all the nurses, and surgical staff. And this evening you were talking about the preparations that you do yourself personally for your work, but in terms of working with your surgical team, how do you work with them for the psychological preparation then if something goes wrong in that regard?
That's a great question, and I'm glad you asked that. And I think your dad is spot on about that. I've done a fair number of operations. I've mentioned two that were kind of unusual. One that I got a chance to plan for, one that I didn't get a chance to plan for. But for instance, I did the first lung transplant in the state of Virginia. I also did the first living donor lung transplants, which is where we took a lobe from one man, another lobe from another man, and put them in a little kid. So we had, this is the first time in my life I ever had this possibility where we might have killed 3 people with one operation. And we had to have 4 ORs going, where we had 3 rooms for the patients, 1 room where we were preparing the organs. And the number of people involved, I counted them, was 100. We had them in a room kind of like this, invited everybody there very early that morning. And we had this conversation about, if everybody here does exactly what they're supposed to do, we'll succeed. And if they don't, we won't. And we went around the room and said, what are you going to do? What's your role? What's your preparation for this lobectomy on the, we talked through that team, that room's team, on what they were going to do, the team that's going to be in the room, they're going to prepare the organs and preserve them before we put them in. That took about an hour and a half. And he said to them, you know, everyone in this room matters. Everything they do matters. Everybody is a critically important part of the team. And not just in their preparation or in the discussion in there, but also for what they might see, it might come up during the operation, right? Some of these things are very routine. They're not like that. I mean, like corn bypass and stuff. So you kind of rocking along with some music, everybody's kind of having a good time. I don't know what we did before. We just kind of, as soon as we said, well, we need to focus for a few minutes and do something. This was different. And we did include in that discussion the idea that we would have a debriefing after that. What could we do different? I had a similar situation just 3 weeks ago when I put in the first ventricular assist device at University of Mississippi, where I just a year ago started working. And one of the reasons they brought me there was to start a program doing that. Same thing, big room, just like this. It was full with the blood bank people, the coordinators, the anesthesiologists, the surgeons, everybody who would be involved, the perfusionists. And we went around the room, once again, same conversation. Everything matters, nothing's neutral. What do you know that we might not know? What have you thought of that we might not have thought of? What questions do you have that we might not have asked ourselves or each other? And, but we said, right then and there, we're going to have a time when we're done, when we're going to ask everybody's feedback. Nowadays, it becomes a little easier because we actually do some of this with email. So when we get done, everybody's on this one email list. And all you need to do is hit reply to all. Any thoughts you have, we want to hear them, and we'll collate them and apply them to the next one we're going to do, which is one day after I get back from here. So we'll be ready, I hope, in that time. But the concept of surgery as a team sport and thinking of it that way is one that we talk about a lot. And it's, I think, crucial to have that mindset.
Adrian, we have time for another? 2 more. Okay, we have time for 2 more questions if anyone has.
Doctor, I know you're an excellent cardio surgeon. I'm not in medical field. I'm a coach for sports. So I try to relate it to 2 questions. As we train high-performance athletes, we say, well, you have to set up a goal and you have to have the competitiveness to be the top of the world or the Olympic or whatever. In your experience, as you are that successful, do you have the competitiveness to say, I want to be one of the best surgeon or the best cardio surgeon in the world? Do you have that in your mind when you are doing your training and career?
Thank you for asking that question. And the answer is absolutely not. Absolutely not. Not at all. And I think that's actually not a concept that is really powerful. One thing, the absolute truth, if you ask yourself the question, is it's unattainable. You won't be. And you might have occasionally some people that might briefly be the best in the world at something, in the Olympics, say, or some other thing like that. But I like to talk to people about not actually having goals, but thinking about how they feel while they're doing what they love to do. And focusing on that, because that's where they get their energy, That is what sustains them. That's something they can accomplish, is to be good at the moment, in the moment, on a daily basis. Actually have a partner. I have a partner in Virginia. I hope nobody actually knows him. This is sound a little bit critical. He was like, his answer to your question was absolutely. I want to be the president of the most renowned organization in the world. Guess what? This year, he is. In about 6 months, he's going to give that presidential address and say, I've arrived. But you know what? He hasn't. And along the way, he often wouldn't actually confide all that much, even though we worked together almost 30 years. We got to Virginia the same day, back in 1980, and we both thought we were going to be country doctors. And next thing you know, he was the chairman of our department, I was the vice chairman of the department, and we said, how did this happen? But occasionally, once in a rare while, in an unguarded moment, he'd say, God, you know, I just got elected president of such and such, and it doesn't feel as good as I thought it would. What am I going to do now? I said, why don't you just enjoy the moment? You know, why don't you enjoy where you are and what you're doing, and the output, the patients, and the residents, and the lab that we run. No, that's not enough. I want to tell you, he's a perennially unhappy man, and he always will be. And I do thank him for setting an example of how not to do it. Not to do it. There's been actually some extraordinarily sad moments in this past year that I think are the result of his attitude about it, actually. It's very emotional, very sad. And I think the idea of having a goal, a specific accomplishment that you're after, can be not very powerful, debilitating, and sometimes destructive to you and the people around you. I say, live in the moment. I'll just give you one more example of that. My friend I keep talking about, Doug Newberg, who was a sports psychologist who worked with me for so long, he was interviewing a woman, I bet some of you all in here are basketball players, this girl who was named Dawn Staley. And she was Player of the Year twice in women's basketball in the United States. She was the point guard of 3 gold medal Olympic games. She played for the national championship, although they lost Stanford in the national championship game they played when she was at Virginia. And Doug was interviewing her. I wasn't there. But he told me, he said, I was interviewing, I was asking her, you know, what's your dream? What do you want to do? And she said, she was pretty taciturn. She didn't want to get into UE, but she finally blurted out. She said, you know, my goal is to win gold medal. That's sort of a goal. It's something to work for. It's not what I live for. So what I live for is to be the best I can be every day. And whatever it is, I want to challenge myself with those goals. Those goals provide a framework for that. But if we don't win the gold medal, I'll be fine. You see, I was fine. We lost the national championship. She missed the final shot, by the way, that could have won the game. I was listening to that game. I could not believe it. She beat her. Women's basketball beat you a woman, right? Don't beat your man. She beat a woman to the hoop and missed her layup. Lost the game. Nothing to it. Didn't dwell on that. She dwelt on the fact that being in that moment was huge. Missing the shot, what? And I think that it's possible for all of us to actually miss that and focus on a specific fact or goal or accomplishment. And then what do you do now? And if it doesn't happen, is your whole life lost? Is your whole life meaningless? Of course not. Right? Your life has meaning because of what you were doing. You were striving to do the best. You did everything you could possibly do to be that way, and whatever you chose to do. Inevitably, it won't all work out. That's one reason why I find your journal articles and magazines and stuff. Sometimes I want to hear about people who missed the shot. Yeah, how are they doing? In fact, if somebody else did hit the shot, it's just dumb. Haven't won that thing. So I try to talk to people about the practical reality that it won't always work out. And if all you're focused on is goals, you will not be a happy person. You will not be fulfilled.
So
well on most day-to-day. If you try to do this, you'll be more accomplishments probably than we ever imagined possible will come your way.
Yes, I do. It's gravy on that. Gravy. The first thing I'd say is that at any age, people, I think, experience what they're doing in a similar way. And I think that you sometimes think that kids are different in some way. They learn differently, they behave differently, they think differently, they feel things differently. And I don't think that's true. I thought as a little kid that every time everybody tried to treat me like a little kid, that I called BS on that. I said, that's just, I'm not a little kid. I was 5 or something, I think, it just never, it just didn't, I just thought it was always wrong to sort of, and I think that's true in education. I think I mentioned it here, but my wife ran a Montessori school for a long time, and what Mia Montessori, who actually was a physician, by the way, what she learned was that little kids learn by doing, they learn by interacting with other people, they learn in their own way, in their own time. And one time I was giving a talk somewhere, I was a visiting professor about how we learn in surgery. And I listened to a whole bunch of her quotations. I said, doesn't that sound like a surgical residency? Doesn't that sound like an ideal educational system for adults? Yeah, that's great, that's great. So then I clicked on the next slide, and it's a picture of her. And a lot of people knew the name of Montessori through Montessori education, Montessori schools and stuff like that. And it was this huge moment where everybody said, wait a minute, she said all that stuff? She only was a childhood education expert. I said, well, that's just because that's who she was around. She had observations about how kids learn and felt and behave and perform. And the only reason she didn't think it applied to adults is she's never around adults. I mean, helping them learn. Well, I was watching my wife run the school for Will and his brothers and all these other kids, and then I was going back to the hospital to teach, theory, older children. To me, it's not any different. So I think that the lessons are not, they're not specific lessons that are different, other than to us, who might be their parents or their coaches or their teachers, to say, treat them as though they are mature people who have an amazing capacity, in my opinion, for listening, and learning, and feeling, and getting better, and experiencing things that they're doing, good or bad. I think that should be, to me, the take-home lesson is that it's not different for the kids. The adults learn a lot like kids do. Kids experience things a lot like adults do, and there's not nearly as much difference between, in my view, as sometimes people make it out to be.
Cal Bosch was asked to ask a question, so I'm not going to say no. This is dead, so you'll just have to stand and project.
You want this? Here. Come over here. Let's make sure that you.
Yes. I think one of the most impressive things that Curt does is what he does to coach his patients. And he has this sneaky little question. He said, what are we doing this for? And it's pretty amazing if you listen to his cases about what it seems to do for them. And so it helps them resonate, as Doug would say, or it gives them perspective again when maybe they lost it. The second thing, which may be even more amazing, is as the professional, he looks at photos of these people doing what they love doing to remind him of his perspective. And my question is this: I think that it's very powerful what simple things like that might be doing for perspective. And I think if we don't have it, I think we're very vulnerable to subconscious emotions, fears, etc. I guess along with the both.
So I'll just one of the famous strategies that I teach people is if you're not sure what the question is, reframe the question. then answer your own question. Are there any Star Trek fans in the group? When Captain Kirk was giving his Starfleet commander a test, do you remember that story, the Kobayashi Maru story, where they were going to be asked an unanswerable question, so he snuck into the simulator the night before and changed the question. So I like to tell people, if you don't know the answer to a question, maybe decision making or maybe in this environment too, you just answer whatever question you want to answer. So I'll just comment on the part about talking to the patients, and what he's talking about is that I like to ask a trick question to my patients when they would come, and I'd say, they'd sit down in the office and say, "Why are you here?" And they'd say, "Wait a minute, you're the doctor. Don't you know?" I said, "Well, I do. I sort of know why you're here. People sent me some records, but I want to know, I know you need an operation. I know that's the plan. I know that that's what we'll do if that's what you want. What I really want to know is why you want to get well. What are you going to do when you're well again?" And I want you to think about that, and almost as a mantra or as a method of putting your mind on what's important to you. Because people, they don't know what their assignment is. They think their assignment is to be worried. They think their assignment is to ask you a gazillion questions. Now, I did learn after a time that if I did that, they would talk to me about whatever they want to do. Ride a motorcycle, drive their convertible, whatever. It saved me some time. I didn't have to answer 100,000 questions on how big the vessels are, how many stitches we're going to take. Basically, they wanted to talk. They were very happy to talk about things that were important to them. But it was very powerful, actually, to get people to think about who they were, what they were about, what they wanted to do when they were well again. And so the part of the picture I didn't know this. I didn't think of this at first, actually. But it did have a ulterior motive that I would have pictures of all of these patients doing fun things that I could enjoy seeing. But the real mission was to get them to think about very clearly staging the picture. What will it look like when you're scuba diving again? I want to see a picture of you full of regalia. I did get one picture of a guy. He was actually a special forces guy. He had injured his femoral artery parachuting out of a plane. And he wanted to be a triathlete. He wanted to be a triathlete, and he was having trouble. And a very driven guy. Asked if I could do this special operation for him. We did it. So he sends me this picture of him, his best time ever. And of course, he's got his speedo, right? My friend said, "All right, I really don't get this. You got a picture of a guy in a bathing suit in your office." There's nothing to it. I just thought he was a cool guy, and the story was cool. But anyway, in essence, what it revolves around is the idea of making the patient a performer. And it's easy when you talk to a player. It's obvious that they're performers or an actor or a musician. It's not quite so obvious that the patient is part of that team that we talked about. And eventually, we came to think of that a lot, about how we could help them be the best performers that they could be, and how we had neglected that initially. So I thought, I do think that's a very powerful concept, and I know that you understood that and liked hearing about that. I think that's something that's quite good. And of course, for you as a patient, you need to take ownership of that. Everybody here, one of the things I say to the students when we're getting ready to talk about surgery, it's only 10% of people will be surgeons in our class. The other 90% of you won't, but everybody will have an operation. All of your patients and you, and all of your family. Someday, sooner or later, if you live on, if you have an operation, how will you be ready for that time? Or how can you be ready? How can you get ready for that time? And the answer is, don't focus on the operation, focus on the recovery, focus on what you're going to do again. And that puts your mind in a good place. And I guarantee it, people that have seen this, I've never had videotape, it seemed too intrusive, but if you talk to somebody, often they'll come in, they're in their bed and they're like this. And you start talking to them about, stuff like that. And you just do like this and say, "Oh yeah, I had this black Miata. I'm driving up the Bridge Parkway." And next thing you know, there's no more talk about the operation or anything. We're talking about driving on the parkway with the top down. And how cold do you let it get before you put the top up, that kind of stuff. So we're no longer talking about things that they have no control over. There's no reason for them to talk to me about what size suit you're in, things like that, right? And they know that. So it empowers them. And I think that's a really, that's a very potent tool, I think, that we can teach people.
So, what a day many of us have been treated to, but what an evening. What are you going to do when you get well? Many of you are well, so you can start right now to do what you do every day. An incredible inspiration and an incredible time with an incredible man, and he would be the last person to say that, so let us say that for you. Dr. Curt Tribble. And I think if I need heart surgery, I'm going to MISSISSIPPI. And I'll pay for it. I'd like to ask really quick, Randy Henderson from the Canadian Sports Centre of Manitoba, and Dr. Adrian Leslie Toogood. Why don't you come up and join Randy? And they're going to do a thank you and some presentations to end the night. We're almost done.
If you haven't read some of Dr. Tribble's stuff or been online Googling, I think it's Google, that I'm learning about for my children. One of the things he talks about, I read one of the interviews he did with Dr. Terry Orlick, and in that he talks about a number of things in terms of this, our notion of a wheel of excellence, the elements of excellence. We've heard a lot of it in the application of the medical world or medical context, but I think you'll realize and hopefully appreciate after tonight's session. And I realize I speak fast, so I'll slow down for the translator. I've done this before, and they basically talk their fingers off, so I'll try and slow down. True story. I taught a volleyball clinic, sidebar, at what used to be the School for the Deaf on Grant. As I'm speaking to the audience, I quickly realized that nobody's looking at me whatsoever, and they were trying to follow the translation that was taking place beside me. So. But again, a lot of the elements and the attributes of excellence that Dr. Tribble has alluded to and Jason has drawn out tonight and certainly at the presentations today are certainly applicable to sport. And he talks about preparing. We heard a bit of it tonight, but he talks about preparing for uncertainty. I did not know I was coming forward tonight at this particular session to speak, so I'm going to try and practice what I've learned and observed and heard from Dr. Tribble in terms of speaking. But certainly thank you once again, Dr. Tribble. It's been an outstanding day. I happen to have been at both of the sessions, or two of the sessions rather, and they've been very insightful, very informative, and this is a 53-year-old former athlete, and it has been. Had I known and were able to incorporate some of your thinking back when I was playing, I may have achieved some of the things that I had hoped to achieve but didn't, but it'll be very helpful in my professional life and my family life. And I hope it's the same for the people in the room tonight. To the Sports Psych Association of Manitoba, Coaching Manitoba, Canadian Sports Centre, and certainly Adrian Leslie Toogood, who's the architect of the Cal Botterill Lecture Series and putting this together. To Dr. Botterill, again, we said this earlier today, but for all you've done and continue to do in sport, thank you very much for that. The University of Winnipeg, certainly, the Faculty of Kinesiology and Applied Science, and finally the University of Manitoba Faculty of Medicine and the Department of Emergency Medicine, which is where our host earlier today. We thank you for your support and sponsorship of this event. Adrian, please remind me if I've forgotten anybody. I don't believe I have. Thank you for being here and attending tonight, and also to Jason Brooks, the moderator, facilitator for the session. Well done, as usual. Excellent job. And Michelle Sawatsky-Coop, as you know, or have heard, former Olympian, mother, a radio personality, an incredible musician and singer, and always finds time to come out and MC these events for us, and we certainly appreciate that work as well. I understand from Adrian we have some gifts to hand out, and I think the first one is to...
Well, for Jason, for thanking him for his time. Thanks. Well, Michelle, if you can come up, we have a shirt for you. And then we need Will to come join his father on the stage, because Will's had a tough day. 3 presentations, and look, he survived. I tell you. We made your dad, a shirt for working out down there in Mississippi, but because it gets so cold down there, we thought we'd get Will a sweatshop.
Will commented on how cold it is here today when he, earlier this afternoon, he tried to say, well, it's quite balmy outside. One of Dr. Tribble's last slide at the Health Sciences Center was all about Mississippi, and the Tourism Bureau of Mississippi must be supporting them because it was all about the accolades and how wonderful Mississippi is. At the same time, Will's explaining to me about water moccasins, copperhead snakes, I believe they're called, which is one of the most venomous species in the world, and how a lobster ended up in their swimming pool. I think he called it a lobster. So, as nice as Mississippi appears to be, and Michelle, you may want to consider where that operation is going to take place. You might get through the heart surgery, but you might die of snake venom, so you might want to reconsider. Anyway, thank you very much for being here, and to all the partners that made this happen. Again, Dr. Tribble, as you've heard, he's gone through an amazing operation 3 days ago, and as we've heard, he's going to leave our community Friday morning and go right back into that world and that environment in a day's time. So we do appreciate you taking time to come out and visit with us and share with us, and it's been a pleasure meeting you and your son. I believe Dr. Tribble will be around for a few minutes after, and Cal and possibly Jason, if you'd like to hang around and ask a few more questions. Thank you, drive safe, and we'll see you again.